Formally, welcome to the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce, the Morden Chamber of Commerce, and the Winkler and District Chamber of Commerce Joint Climate Action for Business training session. This session will focus on the impact of climate change on Manitoba's small and medium-sized businesses. My name is Elizabeth Saftiak, and I am the Vice President of Policy and Government Relations at the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce, and I'm pleased to be your moderator today. On behalf of our team at the Manitoba Chambers, the Manitoba Environmental Industries Association, Novel Futures, the International Institute for Sustainable Development, and KPMG, we acknowledge that Manitoba is located on original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you both to Claire, the Morden Chamber of Commerce, and to Tanya at the Winkler and District Chamber of Commerce for your collaboration on today's session. The goal of our session today with Morden and Winkler is to begin a conversation on climate change and how it might be impacting the way that you are doing business here in Manitoba. We also wish to build awareness and capacity on the importance of building resilience to climate change and achieving carbon reductions. In addition, we will aim to learn about good practice examples by small businesses in taking climate action, as well as barriers that you might be encountering along the way. In terms of the bigger picture, Canada has a national adaptation strategy. Canada also has an ambitious goal to reach an emissions target of 40% below 2005 levels by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. So we know that this is happening, and larger organizations may be better equipped to deal with the impacts of climate change. This is why our focus for this initiative are on small and medium-sized businesses, and it's why we've collaborated with the Winkler and Morden Chambers of Commerce to target small and medium-sized businesses in local communities. We hope to provide a toolkit and a resource guide to enhance your knowledge and to help target strategies for how to tackle climate change and build resilience. In terms of format for today's session, we will start by getting a better sense of how the climate is changing, why it's happening, discuss the impacts of this change, and then discuss how businesses can act against climate change and build resilience to its impacts. If you have questions along the way, please feel free to pop them in the chat, and I will do my best to monitor questions throughout. At the end of each section, we will pause briefly for a Q&A. This will be an opportunity to ask questions of clarification on any of the material that either Darren or Derek has shared during that segment. And then there will be an opportunity at the end for a broader open discussion where you can share insights, stories, express challenges, and we can have a back and forth dialogue. So on that note, it is now my pleasure to introduce our facilitators and our subject matter experts. Darren Swanson is the director of Winnipeg-based consultancy Novel Futures Corporation, and he's also a senior associate with the International Institute for Sustainable Development. He has over 25 years of experience supporting sustainability issues, including climate change mitigation and adaptation. Darren has designed and facilitated numerous in-person and virtual forums globally for the United Nations, as well as locally for businesses, First Nations communities, and government. He holds master's degrees in public administration and international development from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government and in geoenvironmental engineering from the University of Saskatchewan. Derek Earle is manager with the Global Infrastructure Advisory Practice at KPMG. He works with public and private sector organizations on their environmental, social, and governance initiatives and on climate change strategies. He has over 17 years of industry experience in international business, economic development, trade, and investment, and previously served as vice president at the World Trade Center Winnipeg. Derek is particularly interested in decarbonization strategies for companies and industries and in helping companies improve their value proposition. Derek is the founder and chair of the board of Biz for Climate, a business-led not-for-profit that mobilizes business owners to advocate for climate policies to lead the transition to net zero. He was recognized with the KPMG National Impact Award in 2022 as Greenest Champion for his volunteer work in this area. Welcome to you both. Thank you for being here. And I will now pass it along to Darren to begin today's session.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth, and also big thank you to Claire and Tanya with the Morden and Winkler Chambers of Commerce. Glad to be here today virtually, and we look forward to having a chance to talk with everybody that's on the line here today, and we'll maybe do a round of introductions when we get to our discussion segment a little bit later in the webinar. We have a number of slides to go through, and Derek and I are going to take turns going back and forth. And just to help, Darren is the one wearing the dark jacket. That will help a little bit. We will change our glasses the next time, Derek, to differentiate. All right, to get started, we got a lot of material to go through on a few subjects, and as Elizabeth noted, please feel free, use the chat space here on Zoom. As questions come to mind, just throw them in the chat space. We'll have stopping points throughout the webinar to address questions, in addition to really taking some time at the very end to talk about questions, to hear from you. We have questions for you too, as well. All right, so without further ado, let's really start, I guess, at the beginning. And I think it's always really useful just to start, depending, no matter where you're kind of at in the climate change sort of knowledge, is basically the greenhouse effect. So it's important to start at the beginning. We're all quite familiar with the greenhouse effect and how it works. The glass in a greenhouse serves to let sunlight in, but it traps in the heat, allowing us to grow things in colder climates. Well, the atmosphere works essentially the same way. The gases in the atmosphere work to let sunlight in, but also trap in the heat, which is why we're nice and warm and comfortable and space is freezing cold. So that's really what is happening. And the gases is the key part, because it's the gases that have everybody concerned right now. And this slide here is why there is so much concern. So on your screen, we won't provide a lot of graphs, but there are a couple here that are really quite important and you're going to see. This one is from NASA. This is the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere in parts per million on the vertical axis. And what you're going to notice on the horizontal axis, that's years before today. So go all the way to the right side of the screen, and that's today. Now, this is the issue. We're literally off the charts right now in terms of carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere. Right now, we're at about the 400 or approaching the 420 parts per million of carbon dioxide level. And if you look at history, now this is a seriously long history. Because of Antarctica, scientists are able to drill down and get to different layers of ice where carbon dioxide from long time ago has been trapped, and each successive layer represents a different point in time. So we know, and the scientists know, that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has been varying constantly over the course of 800,000 years. It varies, as we can see there, up and down, until we get today. It's never in the history of the planet, recorded, measured history, the concentration has never been above 300 parts per million in the atmosphere. And now we've gone off the charts since 1950. And the upward trend, scientists know, is because of the gases, the carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases that we are putting into the atmosphere as through our activity, social and economic activity. That's why everybody is so concerned. That's why scientists are so concerned. That's why they're alerting the politicians. That's why we're now starting to see policies, because we're off the charts, and that has everybody concerned. So when the atmospheric concentration increases, temperature starts to increase and climate starts to shift and change. So the next graph, this is the last graph, promise. Here is a graph of frost days in Morden. Now, this is dating back to 1950. The gray area is what has been measured and simulated, and this is sort of what we've been experiencing. So since 1950, we've had about 190 frost days, which means we've had 190 days in the winter where the temperature has been below zero. Right at present now, we're looking at in the Morden area around, just under about 180 days, roughly, of these types of frost days. But this is where things change now. The scientists get involved with global climate models and try to simulate what is going to happen with the climate going forward as we increase the gases in the atmosphere. And the red line is a line of projections about what could happen if we don't do a good job of lowering our emissions as a global community. And the other lines, green and blue, are if we do a little bit better job. So as we can see, things are going to change regardless. But if we don't do a good job, and this is the trajectory we are on right now as a global society, we could be in the red zone, meaning by the end of the century, we could have 120 days only of frost-free days in a given year. That's 60 days less than what we experience now. That's 2 months less of frost days where we have below zero temperature. May sound good, but it comes with a lot of impacts. That type of change shifts things. So in the north, we got permafrost that will start to melt, that is not used to melting. That not only creates havoc for foundations, for buildings and infrastructure, but also releases more greenhouse gases. In the north, we have thinning of the ice in the winter and a shorter winter road season. And if you're a remote community, that's a really big deal because you rely on those winter roads to get goods during the winter and supplies. In the south, we're going to be experiencing more extreme weather as we've been seeing both summer and winter, greater risks of flooding, more unpredictability, sometimes less snow cover and drought. All this means kind of real impacts for Manitoba businesses. And in fact, colleagues at the Prairie Climate Center based at the University of Winnipeg are projecting that by the end of the century, Manitoba's summer could resemble that of Kansas and northern Texas. And this is a shift. This is a change that presents our children with an entirely different climate and a reworking of how we sort of thrive in our landscape. There are challenges and there are opportunities to these types of shifts that could happen here over the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and 70 years. Okay, so that's context. Just a quick check-in now, and just a quick stop here to get us used to how to interact with the poll that we're going to use throughout this webinar. So if you have your mobile phone handy beside you, and if you're used to scanning barcodes, you can use your camera function, and you could scan that barcode at the top and click the yellow button that appears, and it'll take you right to this poll. Now, if you don't have a phone beside you, you could just open up another browser on your computer, on your internet, and just type in slido.com and type in the code word climate action, and you'll take you right to this poll. And this will appear throughout the webinar, different polls. So the question we're asking here is, what potential climate impacts are you most concerned in your business? What things, think about the weather that you've experienced in the past that has caused you some grief. Think about what maybe your understanding of what might change in the future. What things have you most concerned right now? Is it extreme weather? Is it wind? Is it flooding? Oh, we got drought appearing. If you just type in some 2 or 3 words there, you'll get. We're just curious to see what some of your main concerns are. We've got drought and flooding. So yes, we're quite. This is obviously the big issue in the southern Manitoba. I know a lot of the towns in southern Manitoba are getting overwhelmed. The city streets are flooding in the midst of heavy, intense rainfall events that are becoming more intense. It looks like, okay, we got supply chain. So we're seeing some interesting things here with regard to different types of changes. Okay, so this was set up. Derek, I think later is going to talk a bit about the different types of risks. And so I think, Derek, you got some good examples here to lean on. Okay, so it looks like everybody's getting a sense for how to work with the polls. Derek, any comments on this? And I think probably you're off and running after this.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. And also just quickly share my thanks to you for all being here, and delighted to be with you for this discussion, and also wish it could have been there in person to see you today. But yeah, no, this drought and the extreme weather certainly standing out. And that makes a lot of sense. I mean, we watched closely in the news, recently in terms of what the region, the Morden region, had been experiencing last year. So that makes a lot of sense that that's top of mind. And we think of it, sort of the climate info that Darren shared and what the projections are. Hotter, drier, longer summers, right? Is as part of the future. So that's great. Well, to kind of with some of that backdrop, we're also going to be talking and shifting the focus a lot to climate action by Manitoba business, and what does all this mean for business, and what are actions we can take, and how do we get engaged. And you're going to see this graphic and this image throughout a lot of our materials and the presentation around climate action, and in this idea of there's an aspect of both enhancing our resilience, improving and adapting to the types of changes that are going to come. How do we deal with future risks and potential disruptions? So we look at how do we make our business and our economies more resilient to that. But then the other side is looking at how do we reduce some of the carbon? How do we reduce the emissions that we're producing? How do we take those steps to mitigate against increased and ongoing climate change? And while there's still a window of opportunity to meaningfully impact that as well. So we can look at what can we do within our business and beyond to do that. And so that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about as well. But there's this idea they're kind of two sides of the same coin, because the actions we start to take to reduce emissions are also typically things that help make us more resilient going forward as well. So it's all very linked in the discussion. Next one. And just bring in some survey data. KPMG does a tremendous amount of research and global research to kind of keep the pulse on these trends and these global trends and issues that are affecting business in multiple sectors. And this is some very recent data from KPMG Canada, has surveyed over 500 small, medium-sized businesses, kind of getting a sense as to where businesses are at, where executives and owners and decision makers are at in terms of this issue. And what you can see is that on the one hand, almost 90% are already starting to take some form of action to integrate some form of ESG practices. And you'll see this acronym more and more in the space, and that refers to environmental and social and governance issues. And so this is both a framework and real themes or trends that companies are looking at, and really becoming an important part of business strategy going forward. So a majority are taking action. We start to see that a majority, 84%, think it's important for Canada to pivot and to stay competitive with other markets, like what's happening in the United States and the European Union in terms of like the policies and the legislation that are supporting economic transition and innovation and clean technologies and different ways of doing business. So it's a competitive issue for business. The small, medium-sized businesses, SMEs, are seen to be very important to this green transition in Canada, which makes sense. The vast majority of companies are small, medium-sized business. But also the last point that is, over 77% find this to be quite complex when we talk about things like decarbonization and climate change and what does this all mean and how it integrates. So everyone's finding it complex. And we're here with you to the session today to take a few steps to help maybe demystify some of this and give some direction going forward. Next one, please, Darren. So really, when you're looking at climate change and this idea of both the risks and the opportunities associated to climate change, there's sort of two broad categories. You've got your physical risks and what we call transition. And so the physical risks are what's happening in the physical world, the changes to the weather and, many of the issues that you highlighted in the poll just now in terms of floods and drought, heat, weather impacts. The other category of transition risks are what's happening, in the world, in the socioeconomic world, the policy environment, what laws are changing, what new policies or regulations, what's happening in the marketplace, what consumer trends are changing, reputational, etc. Move to the next one, Darren. There's a few examples we can continue to look at on the same idea. So on the left side, you see a few other examples of, the warmer weather sounds great, but it also will bring more extreme weather and things like pests and invasive species, and what's the effect on the agriculture in terms of what type of crops can grow and thrive here in sort of these changing weather patterns. And again, on the transition side, both risks and opportunities. I believe one of the comments in the poll talked about kind of a busier northern transportation framework. Yeah, we sit in Manitoba with the northern port of Churchill, a deep water port. If that becomes open, if the Arctic becomes more ice free, if many things we can think about for Manitoba, supply chains, there's different aspects about that. And a lot of this transition side really is in the realm of the business issues, right? So if you're thinking, what does this mean in terms of like my business strategy, a lot of the different considerations, these are the types of issues that we're looking at more and more. If you flip to the next one, this would be just one more example or an illustration in the same category of transition risks. And it's in this space of financial disclosures. And what we're seeing is more and more trends, pressures, and even mandatory disclosures coming forward. So for things like publicly traded companies and for reporting to your shareholders, disclosing what is the climate risk of our organization. Do we know what that looks like? Investors want to know, stakeholders want to know, or regulators want to know. So there's reporting frameworks and standards and accounting frameworks. And the left are a couple of examples that are, kind of at the leading edge of some of the global standards through International Sustainability Standards Board. But at some of the global initiatives of things like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures is really, setting some of the agenda in terms of where things are at in terms of financial disclosures. And so these these are things that are, that are trickling down more and more and becoming pressing issues for the small and medium-sized business. Might be like, well, I'm not publicly traded, at this time, I'm a family-owned business, but it's starting to affect what lenders are doing, raising and accessing capital, because everyone is starting to look for and understand, like, what is the impact of my business, but what is the impact of our investments? What types of business are we involved in? So that's just one illustration. The next one there. And so this slide here is a bit of a useful framework in terms of thinking about your business and thinking about climate action and how it applies to your business. And two simple concepts of kind of this home game and away game. And I realize we're conveniently now wearing a white and a dark jersey here, so we can bring in the hockey metaphor of our home and away games. But the home game, this is if you think about what's happening in your company, within your operations. How are you running your business? What is your footprint on the environment? What type of emissions are you emitting? What's your supply chain? These are the sort of the direct measures within your company and operations. The away game concept is how are we interacting with the marketplace? What are the products and services that we're offering and that we're delivering? And how do these contribute to climate solutions and emissions reductions? And it's that question that also really starts to touch on where are the opportunities going forward, because there are tremendous opportunities for those that can provide solutions to help businesses transition, industry sectors, the energy we use, the materials we use. There's an awful lot, and that's a lot of the forward-looking market opportunity space to not only do a good business, but also contribute to climate action. And if you flip ahead, Darren. So that's, a bit of the background. Darren sort of covered some of the climate context, the climate change context and science. So we know what's happening, and ultimately that's what's driving a lot of this behavior. I just touched on some of the, a little bit of a framework and context from the business perspective. And then as we go forward for the balance of the session, we're really going to touch in deeper on these three themes, and we'll take some turns going through each of them. So the first we'll turn to next is looking at assessing climate risks and opportunities and some frameworks and tools for that. The second part, we'll get into looking at emissions reduction and this concept of the circular economy and what does that mean. And lastly, we'll look at this idea of nature-based solutions, which is growing, which is getting just an increasing amount of attention and for concepts to look at. So that's kind of what the rest of the session is going to look like broadly. And with that, we'll come to the next slide, and we'll sort of hit our first pause to open it up to Darren or to myself if there's any questions coming from the group or through the chat that we might want to respond to right away and clarify anything.
Perfect. Thank you to you both. We don't have any questions in the chat yet. This is an opportunity for anyone in attendance to ask a question of clarification, anything that either Darren or Derek might have gone through. I've tried to pop in as many links as I can for further information into the chat for reference, if you'd like to connect with those websites. Otherwise, I have a couple of questions perhaps to engage in some brief discussion. So Darren, what are some examples of home and away game actions by Manitoba businesses that you would have seen when you undertook our first iteration of this climate action for business back in 2019?
Yes, thank you, Elizabeth. And yeah, we did have a good lively round of engagements with chambers across the province in the pre-COVID era. And that focus was largely on the carbon reduction side. So we did hear a lot of good insight, I think, from local chambers and members. And one comment that does stick out is this: sometimes climate change action could seem a lot like drinking water from a fire hose. That was one small business member with the information and where do I start? And he cited a really good example where he just looked at his operation in his small business facilities and where can I make some small changes, and just the efficiency in lighting. More energy efficient lighting and a few just energy efficient actions within the walls of their business were places that he could start. And so that was interesting examples. In the away games, we saw some good examples of Manitoba businesses looking at taking advantage of the new markets for renewable sources of energy. So we had solar power providers in Brandon. Examples of well, Derek's going to show a few examples here coming up in a little while too. Just providing new products that really service a market that is now there's new demand for. So that was, I thought, quite interesting.
Thanks, Darren. Do we have time for a question for Derek?
And you can use your participants can too. If you know where the raise hand function is in your sort of actions, you can always feel free to in these little Q&A stopovers, you just can raise your hand and we can make sure that we'll see that and we can give you the floor. Feel free to turn your camera on, that type of thing. Keep it informal, but feel free to use the chat space too. And while Derek or I are talking, we can really start to address questions as well. And thank you, Elizabeth, for putting in those points in the chat space already with those links.
For sure, my pleasure. Did we want to ask a question of Derek, or would you like to move on to the next section?
Just say clockwise. Maybe we should move on at this point.
For sure, sounds good.
Derek can keep an eye on the chat space and kind of respond in the chat space if we do see one.
Perfect. Right. So that means we're going to move on to Climate Action 1, assessing risk and opportunity, enhancing resilience.
Okay. So this is I guess the away jersey now. We'll be speaking. Thanks, Derek, for setting up the business impacts and risks context. Now we're going to talk a lot about just assessing risk and opportunity. And this is all, of course, to enhance our resilience. So we hear the term resilience. And what does that mean? Well, resilience is about reducing. You got three dials we could turn to help increase resilience. One is actually sort of reduce the hazard itself, climate change hazard. I like to think of this too in terms of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. You think about the hazard being the pandemic. you look at exposure. So what does it mean to reduce the exposure to a hazard? Well, in the pandemic sense, it was about, you know, social distancing measures, wearing masks. That kind of helps with the exposure aspect. Reducing vulnerability, for example, could be the fact that vaccines for increasing immunity, that type of thing. Reducing the hazard, the actual occurrence of the pandemic, a little bit of a harder effort. It's more of a global effort. That's involves, you know, ensuring sort of habitat conservation in terms of where these viruses are coming from, where animals are interacting with humans, regulation of food and animal markets, that type of thing. But so some of the dials are harder to turn in some cases, but this is the picture of resilience. Hazards come from all directions. Climate change we're focusing on here, but we know there's other hazards that create the sort of disaster situations like pandemics, cyber threats, we have financial shocks, various things. So experts with the Council of Canadian Academies really do urge everyone to think about the full risk landscape. And that's to really help identify solutions that maybe work across risks. So that's an important aspect to think broadly when you're a business, however small you are, to just kind of think about all the risks you got going and how you might need to sort of prepare in advance. And we want to kind of share some tools if you haven't been exposed to some yet that maybe help you get started. One of these tools, let's get right into a couple of just useful tools here, and we'll get right into something that can be done whether you're a micro SME of one person or if you're a business of 500 people. You can sort of start through the process of strategic foresight, which really helps businesses to kind of plan and do strategy making. And this is a bit more just really a narrative process, but it really involves three steps. Three useful steps: foresight, insight, and then action. And in the context of climate change, there's some questions you could ask at each stage. So in the foresight, it's about sitting around the table with either yourself and a cup of coffee or your staff members and thinking about how might the climate change in my area? And you might be thinking, well, I don't know that. We do have some data available at our fingertips now. Thanks to colleagues at climatedata.ca and also at the Prairie Climate Center. There are websites you can go to. And in fact, the graph that I showed earlier for Frost Days in Morden, I went to climatedata.ca, clicked on Morden, and it gave me all sorts of information about how different weather and climate variables may change over the course of the century due to climate change. And there's also brochures that help you with a little more narrative form about how different the climate is expected to shift in different parts of Manitoba. And the links are provided there. That gives you the foresight about what could happen going forward. The next step of insight is taking that information and then reflecting on, okay, how might changes in climate actually impact my business in your home game and your away games? And you did a little bit of this already in the poll, the word cloud poll, where you were thinking about some of these impacts, and some of those impacts were direct physical impacts like the extreme weather and flooding, and others were indirect like a busier north or supply chain issues. And that there were risks as well as opportunities to be thinking about. So this is where you're trying to gain insight on what these changes mean for your business. Then it's about action. The last step is what should I do to mitigate these risks or to really realize these opportunities that are potentially on the table. And that's a good brainstorming process. And it's a good thing to remember here is that some of these actions could be things that make sense to do now. They're robust, they work across all possibilities, cost effective now, and it's just, okay, let's do it. Others may be a bit more of an investment and may depend on maybe how things evolve a bit more. So you may want to wait for a bit more of a signal and then trigger that action in the future. But at least you've thought about it and have it on the shelf ready to go and you're anticipating it. This foresight, insight, action process, you can get training on this. There's for-fee training available from the California-based Institute for the Future. There's free webinars available through the Winnipeg World Trade Center website that were delivered a few years ago, free materials that kind of help you on this process. Okay, I'm just going to go more quickly through a couple of other examples of methods. The other kind of two methods are really about risk management and business continuity. And there are international standards out there that help with those two types of activities in a business. And if you're a more of a medium-sized business, you'll be familiar with some of these assessment, risk management, and business continuity standards. And I've listed some of those links there. So there are protocols out there that can be followed to help a business get moving on these things. One specific tool is mentioned on the right, and that is to deal with climate change risk assessment. And so if you're a business and have assets and even infrastructure, this is quite a useful tool that takes you through a few steps about identifying the climate hazard, analyzing the risks. And this is a bit more of a quantitative process than the strategic foresight one earlier. This one does some actual quantitative, semi-quantitative risk assessment that allows you then to prioritize risks that are maybe more urgent and more important than others. So this is a slightly more involved process. You would need the help of a trained facilitator in this case. In the previous strategic foresight, a trained facilitator also helps you get more mileage out of the process. But here in these cases, risk management, business continuity, you may want to get a hold of somebody that can give you some guidance to get you started. And we've got some links there listed that were some free materials that are available through the Manitoba Climate Risk Training Program. So the Manitoba government has been rolling out a lot of training materials that are free to Manitobans and Manitoba businesses. And here are a couple examples right here. And then the last one is a paid a course you can take on doing this risk assessment process if you want to create that internal capacity. Okay, that's a lot to take on. And good thing is we have a brochure for you that we will circulate to all of the participants online here. So we've got a 4-pager on this that helps describe this a bit more, helps you think about how you can get started, where you can go to for more information. So just a little bit of a how-to starter. And those will appear in your inbox here over the coming weeks. And they'll also be made available on the climate toolbox that the Manitoba Chamber of Commerce will be updating. But these are the 3 methods I talked about to get you a handle on how to identify and address risks and opportunity in your business. You could do it if you're a super small business. You could do it if you're a larger business. And you really ideally want to be thinking about these things as a whole. Strategic foresight, the narrative process plays a role. More formal risk management where you're doing a little bit of semi-quantitative analysis to prioritize your risks, and then business continuity planning. These 3 should ideally work together in a business. And just before we move on, just a quick back to the poll mechanism here. You can, if you have your phone handy, this should appear if you just reopen your phone. This poll should automatically appear. If not, you can rescan the barcode or go to the website. I'm just curious, have any of you had experience with any of these 3 methods in any form? Business continuity planning may be something that maybe perhaps a medium-sized business may have formally done. This is about having that plan in place. And this is now, if you've been through the COVID, you've probably heard now a lot about business continuity planning and how they're urging to have business continuity plans for certain types of hazards and disasters like pandemics. Climate change is no different. It's something that evolves slower, but business continuity planning for handling some of the extreme weather event situations is really quite important. So we do have some experience with risk management processes here. Perhaps we can maybe hear about that at the end here when we do have a chance to talk with everybody sort of more face-to-face. A little bit here, a little bit of experience and interaction with each of these methods. So I do really encourage you to share that with us here in about 30 minutes time when we have a chance to chat. Okay, with that, thank you very much, everybody. Derek, I think I'm going to turn things back to you. I do believe if
Or we just open it up for any questions, kind of any questions, clarifications on what Darren's just presented us?
Yes, this should be I think this was a Q&A slide, which is not appearing. So Elizabeth, over to you. I haven't been sort of keeping my eye on the chat space yet. But...
Thanks very much. We do not have any questions in the chat. I have added in some additional links based on the material that you went through. And before we close the Zoom today, I can take a screenshot and circulate that with both Claire and Tanya as well, which will have those links for the resources that you went through. But as Darren mentioned, we'll be providing those background documents to you hopefully next week. That's our intent. And the information that Darren's gone through and Derek has gone through will be in there. But otherwise, no questions in the chat.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I'll keep my eye on the chat space too if a question pops up. I know that was a lot of information in a short amount of time, so I'll keep my eyes open. And Derek, over to you.
Sounds great. Thanks, Darren. And perhaps as Darren kind of mentioned in his anecdote a little bit earlier about the drinking from a fire hose. So if this material is new to any of our participants along the line, there might be a bit of that element in our very presentation here as we go through. So might be the type of stuff to digest going forward, but we do look forward to some discussion and maybe some questions will pop up. But I think we're right back onto another poll question if I've got the same order as well. And so we're moving into this section is going to start talking about the circular economy. And just a quick sense question of what do you think, attendees, what percentage of the world's resources that we extract and use are circled back in and through the economy? And a nice little multiple choice for us here. And there's no wrong answer to this one except 3 wrong answers to this one. So, so do we have any thoughts? And
okay, I've rolled it forward for you, Derek. We got the results. You can keep on if you haven't submitted yet. Everybody can keep submitting. But
okay, well, we kind of the highlighted green. That means we've got the we've got the check mark on there. So yeah, it looks like about half of you had gotten there. But yeah, shockingly 9%, right? 9% in terms of resources that actually get recycled through. So when we think of all the resources we use and all the business and industrial activity of everything we produce and we consume, there's only about 9% that's making its way back through, and the rest is going forward into sort of landfills. Yeah, okay, perfect. Onto this one. So we want to talk about this notion of the circular economy, and we want to talk about that also as a way, or as one of the strategies and tactics to start, businesses can use to start reducing their emissions. So I thought just before diving further into the circular economy and what that's all about, that it's helpful to just go through this slide about the types of greenhouse gas emissions. And that's really what this graphic is mapping out here. And you'll see as you start to delve into this, there's these 3 categories we call scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. This is sort of fundamental language that appears now in all of the reporting frameworks and even referenced in the financial frameworks and sustainability reports. It's more and more common for businesses, organizations, governments to be talking about the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. So this is a quick definition. You've got the definition on the left and the image on the right. But scope 1 are those emissions that come directly from your business, that you are generating while you're doing your activities, while you're running your factory, while you're operating your fleet of vehicles, while you're heating your buildings. So it's those emissions that are direct, and within your footprint. And scope 2 is a bit similar, but this has to do with ones that you're purchasing for your energy, and that's that which you're consuming. So in Manitoba, we're actually quite fortunate that already like 99% of our energy is hydroelectric energy. So that's already on the very low emissions scale. But if you were located somewhere else and you were purchasing power from a coal-powered fire plant or a natural gas burning facility, these would have a higher level of emissions associated to that energy that you're purchasing. Renewables, hydro, solar, wind, much lower, and that's where a lot of the move is. So that's kind of the scope 1 and 2 that are within the operations. And then scope 3 gets sort of farther out in scope from your business to looking at your supply chain or that value chain. And so this is both kind of all the products and services that you're purchasing that come into your business to create the products and to run the business as you do. So how those products are made, what's the footprint of those, the transportation associated to that, things like, even business travel and all those things that factor into delivering what you do. And then the other side of the scope 3 is afterwards. And once the product leaves your door or leaves the factory. So how are those products used? What's the life cycle on those? What happens when they're disposed? What happens when they go to the landfill? What sort of emissions is happening there? So all that sort of like larger circle around your company is the scope 3 emissions. And it's just good to have a sense as to those, those different areas that you can start to address and focus on. And what most businesses are doing, and much of the reporting that occurs to date, relates to scope 1 and scope 2. And that's the natural starting points, because you start to control like what's in your shop, like that's directly in your control. So you look at the resources we're using, you look at our things like our energy efficiency, we look at our transport and efficiencies, things like that, and of course the energy we're sourcing. Everyone is having last thing to say on this, everyone is having a much harder time with this idea of scope 3, because this starts to get much more complex and it starts to go farther and farther down the chain, like away from where you are. It's very important to be aware of, and you can start to already look ahead and strategize and to think about, oh, what am I producing? Where am I getting this from? How is it getting to me? Important questions to start asking, but that's one that a lot of businesses are still really struggling with to get a handle on. But that's also where the majority of the emissions live. So that's a bit that framework. Okay, on to the next one. So this is to get a picture of, what is this circular economy that we're talking about? And really summed up nicely in these two images. So on the left, this is the way we've traditionally always done things. It's a much more linear process. It's a straight line. We take the resources, out of the ground, we extract them, we use them, we manufacture them, and then we dispose of them. And straight line, and as we learned, 9%, only 9% are sort of being recycled. So that's still very much characterizing how we're doing things. That kind of take, make, waste model. And a lot of our consumer economy is really built, and it's exploded in the last 40 plus years in terms of you think of disposable products that are like single-use products. From plastic bags get talked about, but just think of all the convenience and consumer products, disposable fast food. There's a lot of waste associated to all that, and it just goes in there. The circular economy is all about changing that model. And it's about changing how we use resources to run our businesses and to produce the goods and services that we need. And it's about developing ways to circle the resources back through. So we're taking less out, of using less natural resources to begin with. You see the line on the right is much skinnier arrow on the right. We're using less in natural inputs. We're reusing things that are non-renewable. So after we produce something, waste streams are being reused, energy is being reused, it's being cycled back through so that the whole picture becomes much more sustainable, both on emissions. These are key strategies for reducing emissions, but also just preserving the natural environment and sort of the limited natural resources, renewable resources we have, which we're rapidly using up, and drastically reducing that what does go into landfills, into incineration, which are also big sources of carbon emissions. So that's a picture of kind of the difference between the two, the linear model and And there's a lot of talk and focus about transitioning to this, and it's an important concept for business because it can give you some pointers in terms of where you can look to steer your business and find those new opportunities, both to reduce your emissions, work on your home game, and also opportunities for your away game. Next one, please. So this is just a little bit more explanation on this idea of the circular economy. Again, key idea is reducing the waste and reducing the use of new resources that go into it. And there's multiple strategies and tactics that can go into it. And we'll see this in some of the examples we're about to go through shortly here. So bringing waste products back into production or finding new uses for waste products, extending the life cycle of products, and of course, using renewable energy and resources are key pieces of this. And on the right, this is just a pointer, to point you to some really excellent resources that have been produced by Supply Chain Manitoba. Some of the examples we're going to show you come from this work, but there's some great foundational work from this organization. There's some tutorials and videos and more case studies, really trying to look at this from the supply chain perspective, because that's a key focus, and all businesses have their supply chain. So how do we start to incorporate more of those practices there? So highly encourage you taking a look at that. Next one, please, start. And this idea of how can the circular economy help to reduce global emissions? Well, the forecasting and some of the estimates around this is that it can play a substantial role. The vast majority of emissions out there are still coming through industrial processes and through at the end of the day through businesses and through companies. So incorporating circular economy is estimated by able to reduce globally by close to 40%, in not quite the next 10 years, and reduce the amount of materials and the footprint to produce those things, which, as we know, going back to the climate science part of the introduction, all of these things are important to help limit the amount of global warming that we're going to experience, because the more it warms, the more extreme, the more impactful, the more disruptive all that's going to be. So these are strategies that factor into it, but also that align or can align with where some of the new opportunities are. Example on the right is just looking at plastics, just better plastic management and looking at ways to reincorporate that. This was, some Government of Canada estimates about the potential to reduce 1.8 million tons of CO2 and create as many as 42,000 jobs. So there's definitely economic opportunities associated with these efforts. Another example. So next is, it's sort of thinking through, okay, well, how do we start to do this? How do we start to apply some of these concepts? Or what do we start to, bring back into our business? Design and this idea of eco-design really becomes quite prominent in this idea of the circular economy, because there's, the best way really to start to ensure that we're going to be able to use and reuse the waste streams and reincorporate those materials back into the economy, into other processes, or find new value for those streams, is to design it at the start, right? So how are we producing our products, designing them to be more durable, to be more long lasting, to be less disposable in terms of the very products themselves? Ways to design in how can we do this with less energy and less resource and be more efficient? How can we build them so that they're easier to use or to repair or to refurbish and keep going? There's a fair bit of debate and discussion around this. You might hear it more and more about the ability to repair products. At one time, everything used to be fixed and had a long shelf life. Now I think we've all probably bought an appliance at some point, 6-8 months into it, and something goes, you almost have to replace the whole thing because it's incredibly difficult to repair that. So that design is very important, which translates into, what type of materials are we using, how are we manufacturing, and how's it going to be at the end of life of that product? What can be done with it? Or can it even be recycled? Can the product be recycled? And that's actually a huge one. Again, it's a challenging environment. There can be long, probably debates around that, but there's many things that we think are recycling and we throw it into the blue bin. Turns out it actually can't be because it can't be done here, right? It can be somewhere else, but can they be designed to be recycled from the start? And does it work with that system? So that's where that design and planning comes into it, but it's important to be aware of. Next one. So this is another tools, the 10 R's to help think through circular economy and steps and actions you can take. We often, I remember like going back a while back when I was a bit younger, there was, it seemed to be 3, like reduce, reuse, recycle seemed to be the 3 that mantra is kind of like programmed into my brain. I saw a lot of commercials on that. I think it's expanded to 10 now. So we got many more, we got 7 more R's to look at. But they relate to these 3 categories you see on the left about, smarter product use and the way we're manufacturing, where we're producing the products, extending the lifespan of products, components, services, inputs, and the use of materials at the end. So, taking a deeper look, I'll read through them in case it's small on screens for anyone. But the first one, refuse. This idea of like refuse. Actually, we just don't need that entirely. So that's that eliminates it right out of the gate. This can be done or offered differently. Rethinking how things are developed, designed, and used. Of course, reducing the energy, reducing the inputs. Using less to do more. Like how can we design and innovate for better things? Reusing, repairing, refurbishing. These we touched on a little bit in these examples. Being able to refurbish things, extending the life. Restoring products is an interesting example coming up. Remanufacturing, taking things and combining new products, or repurposing different products or waste streams. And then eventually recycling, and the very last is kind of recovering, where you're getting into now what we really can't use elsewhere is being incinerated or turned into an energy generation of some sort. So you're recovering some of that energy in the system. So 10 R's, you can take a look at that, but there's no doubt multiple of these things that already I'm sure could start applying to you directly in your business today. Next one, Darren. So yeah, a few examples, and we got some local Manitoba examples, businesses you might be familiar with or could relate to. And the first one here is Frontiers North. So this is the tourism company based up in Churchill, Manitoba, famous for their polar bear excursions, polar bear viewing. Churchill and polar bear capital of the world, continue to get rave reviews on tourism. You can see the tundra buggy in the background there. So they have been and worked on a project with New Flyer Industries, who builds the electric buses and the vehicles. And so the idea is they've taken batteries formerly powering electric buses and have transitioned them into power the tundra buggies. These use ostensibly less power and energy to power the tundra buggies than the transit buses. So it's a way to give a new life and lease on life to the product. It's taking it out of the waste stream, and it's keeping it active in the economy. And it's also taking these vehicles off of their own emissions as well. So that's one great example there. Next one. So Overton Environmental, West St. Paul, just outside of Winnipeg, more in the agriculture sector. And so this is the idea of kind of taking waste streams and creating a new value and new products through that. Potato scraps and starches, and from the Simplot plant. So these are kind of waste streams out of potato production that are being taken, treated, repurposed, and then turned into a compost, which is now itself a product offering, and it's going back into soil regeneration as well. So it's contributing now in other ways. So this is starting to see how the circularity works. And also a good example, I like this one because it's circularity, but it's not only like within the confines of my shop. This is how you start to see other businesses and industries link up together, to fill kind of new spaces in the supply chain. And I can bring this innovation in, which can help your process here, right? And it starts to build that larger circular economy, as opposed to just getting beyond just what's happening in my business. It's also very much, and it's a away game piece as well. So this is kind of an away example from the other one. And we'll go to one more example here. Tin House Designs and Coffee Company, a couple out of Russell, Manitoba. And so they've been doing some interesting work. So this is kind of, they're recycling, kind of refurbishing materials, repurposing, taking like waste, taking tin from old buildings and transforming it into to art and reusable products. They've got a very interesting video on their website. It kind of tells their story of what they do. But this is, these would be old buildings, heritage buildings that are closed down, condemned, nothing really further fate besides a demolition of these buildings, but it's taking those products and bringing them back into the marketplace. And they've also wrapped around a variety of kind of small scale sustainable practices that really starts to, I think, I like this example too, because it brings us into the level of like, well, almost any small business can start to look at these types of changes. Looking at things like your use of paper, encouraging the reusable bags. So those are steps, composting the materials out of their coffee shop, producing as much as they can, growing and producing local produce of their own that goes into products, herbs, etc. Kind of that local source, local economy, but on a quite small scale. So really, there's ways at the different levels for companies to be getting involved in doing this. So I think on to our next one. Conclude this section with one more poll question to.
I think maybe Derek, we might we're going to take a couple of our polls and we might move them to the end of the webinar and kind of come back to them, I think.
Sure. Okay.
Just in the interest of time.
Yeah, no problem.
Let's see where we at now. So Elizabeth, just a quick sort of stop in here. Do we need to take a little bit of a breather on some questions, or should we keep rolling into our last topic so that we have time for discussion?
I would say keep going.
Yep. All right, fasten your seatbelts. We just got one topic, and we'll just it won't take very long, and we want to hear from you after this. The last topic, the last climate action now, is something that actually helps to do what Derek was just saying in terms of reducing emissions. It also helps to enhance resilience, and that's using nature to support both of those types of actions. And there's a lot of evidence, compelling evidence, showing how cost effective this is and longer lasting they are than traditional built solutions for doing this. So just some examples and terminology we'll just set you up with. And we have another sort of 4-page brochure for you too that you'll receive that helps provide a lot of this information. But yes, it's all about helping to enhance resilience and reduce carbon, and we can really start to leverage nature to do both of those. So just a couple quick terminology points, definitions you're going to start to hear. You're going to hear the use of nature called nature-based solutions. That's a term that you will bump into more and more, and that is just using nature to achieve some service. And you're going to see some examples. You're going to hear other terms too over the coming years and days and weeks, and you're going to hear the term natural infrastructure, using nature to achieve outcomes that built infrastructure could do, or using nature in combination with built infrastructure to achieve things like flood control or heat management if you're in the middle of a city. You're going to hear terms like green infrastructure as well. And that's used a lot in urban settings. You're going to hear that term when we use nature to achieve certain outcomes, and particularly with regard to stormwater management, things like green roofs or rain barrels, rain gardens, things like that. You're going to hear the term natural assets as well. When we used intact natural resources, forests, surrounding forests, intact wetlands that a municipality may be starting to use to deliver services like treating water or providing recreational opportunities, things like that. Let's get into some examples here, just a few. Here's a picture. So nature-based solutions can be used in all types of different landscapes. If we take the urban landscape up in the upper right, you see examples like just trees. It can be as simple as using trees and vegetation to cool areas And this is particularly important in downtown areas, in cities, and even in towns. Pavement and car roofs just increases heat. And if you don't have vegetation around, you can find on stifling hot summer days, which are projected to be more of, just adding trees to your landscaping can help shade and provide cooling effects to your building, to your office space even. Getting more sophisticated, green roofs can be constructed in specialized ways to help reduce runoff off of rains, and that helps sort of the stormwater sewer systems that we know in towns can get overwhelmed in the summer. And also these things provide co-benefits, nice spaces to help with physical and mental health, and they also help with air quality. So lots of different things in the urban settings, like permeable pavements even to help manage stormwater runoff, retention ponds you're seeing more in suburban areas, even naturalized and engineered wetlands. But of course, we got other types of settings. So in rural landscapes, even using green belts to help sort of protect and water quality also enhances, and more vegetation, more trees help to soak up carbon. So there's a benefit there to greenhouse gases, and it also helps to, trees also help to manage wind issues. So we know along a lot of our highways, it's better when we have trees along to help with the snow drifts. We're starting to plant those now along the Trans-Canada Highway. And so everything helps to even actually soak up more carbon and help deliver resilience to climate change in more sort of wintry storm events like we see now. We got riverine settings where just things like floodplain restoration are very helpful to help mitigate against, help flood control in riverine settings, but those riverine and reforestation areas also help to soak up carbon. So we're achieving both sort of resilience to flooding, and we're also enhancing our settings for soaking up carbon. If you live on coastal areas, you also have options. So if you're in shoreline areas, you can have shoreline stabilization approach that use natural features that can help make you more defensive to rising for storm surges, or even if you're in the coast, and this will be an issue up north too, rising sea level due to climate change. So these are just a few examples that I just wanted to touch briefly on. We will have, of course, a primer, a document for you to kind of provide some of this information. You will see in there examples. Here's just some pictures of green roofs and engineered wetlands in towns, and nice little stormwater management areas in town areas that capture water. Lots of different types of green infrastructure and natural infrastructure available. And we're seeing even businesses now incorporate some of these green spaces inside of their building areas to help manage stormwater runoff in their own business area, and also provide opportunities and spaces for employees to enjoy some quiet time. So there's some examples. You'll also have access to these slides with these links. Just to remind us that there's a policy context for this. So even in Canada's plan, the federal government's plan to reduce carbon emissions, they talk about natural climate solutions that can help deliver reduced emissions and soak up carbon. Planting trees and protecting and restoring grasslands and wetlands are natural assets, are ways that can help here. Improvements in agricultural land management to store more carbon in the soils, forest management, products that actually embody carbon and keep it without, like wood products, help to kind of keep the carbon stored as opposed to being sort of lost into the atmosphere. Lots of opportunities out there, and there's guidance documents out there to help you find out where these opportunities are. There's also tools that our 4-pager will help you with that can help you identify these natural infrastructure solutions, quantify their benefits for you as a business, whether it's heat management or stormwater management or carbon reductions, and help you then attach dollar values to these benefits. Because a lot of times, if you're going to make the case for this in a business to do this, you need to understand the dollar value as well. And there's tools out there to help with that.
Thank you, especially to the businesses who joined us. Thank you for being here, for being amenable to changing the platform, but especially for your meaningful contributions. We've learned a lot from you. So thank you so much for your time today. I have just one more minute of next steps to share with you. But before I do that, I did want to ask whether Claire and or Tanya wanted to provide any closing remarks.
I just want to say a quick thank you just to everyone who attended and just for allowing us to partner with you all on bringing awareness around this, and how impressed I am at all of the amazing things that our businesses are already doing to lessen their carbon footprint. So that's it. Thank you so much. I appreciate this.
Thanks, Tanya. Good. Okay. So what's next? We have more in-person and virtual sessions planned throughout the province in April and May. To give you a sense, our in-person forums are planned in collaboration with local chambers of commerce, like Morden and Winkler and District. So thank you again to both Claire and Tanya for your willingness to collaborate today. This wouldn't have been possible without you and your outreach to local businesses. So truly, we are grateful. And our webinars are being held in collaboration with partner associations and organizations. So to give you a sense of the webinars we've held to date, we've collaborated with the Manitoba Environmental Industries Association as well as the Women's Enterprise Center. So we will be using the insights gleaned and the lessons learned from these sessions to update the Manitoba Chambers of Commerce Climate Action Toolkit. This will involve updating the primers on climate action, as Darren has already conveyed, and providing new case examples of Manitoba businesses who have successfully implemented climate action and a synthesis of barriers and barrier busters. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. I may not have the answer. If it's a subject matter question, happy to pass along contact information for Darren and Derek, who can provide answers to your questions. And that's it for us.